Story 1. Squad. All lights out. The counselor yelled. We called him San Sanich among ourselves, but he didn't like it. The boys called him less formally, just Sanich. This is probably why he more often announced lights out and wake up for the girls. In general, lights out means lights out, although none of us attached any importance to this. We simply hid under the blankets when the counselor once again decided to check on us. That evening, it was planned to gossip a little and discuss the past day only a few minutes after lights out. That's why we all sat down next to each other on the floor to hear each other better. However, soon everyone got tired of the gossip, and then my friend Lilia suggested calling one of the spirits. Our choice fell on the Queen of Spades. But when we said Queen of Spades, come for the fourth time, the door of the closet with things suddenly opened with a roar, and the nightstand near one of the beds rattled. An ominous howl was heard. The girls screamed. Suddenly, a tall silhouette appeared from the darkness. The nightstand still howled and rumbled. The girls were screaming. Suddenly the howl stopped and wild laughter was heard. Morons! I yelled at the dark silhouette, bent in half. By the light of a flashlight, everyone saw a terrible monster, a boy from the next room. Anton doubled over with laughter. At this time, Vovan crawled out of the bedside table, also laughing until he cried. He had some kind of illness and was very short for his age. I will not further describe all the anger that the girls expressed by fighting with pillows and throwing slippers and other heavy objects at our night visitors. However, closer to midnight, we were all sitting quietly and telling horror stories. Or rather, Vovan said, because he did it masterfully. Have you heard the legend? Vova asked, looking around furtively. Which one? We asked in unison. About the detachment. Here he paused theatrically and then continued in an ominous whisper. A long time ago there was one detachment in this very camp. The children in this detachment were terribly disobedient. They never obeyed their leaders. And then one day they had to regret their behavior. It was strictly forbidden to go into the forest at night. However, the strict ban did not stop the children. After the lights out, they quietly climbed out the window one by one and went for a walk in that same forest. Vovan pointed towards the forest, which was located outside the camp. In the morning, the counselors did not find the children in their places. There were no them on the campgrounds either. Then, in order not to make a fuss, the counselors went in search of the forest. But they too disappeared. And when none of them were found, they decided to close the camp. However, when the scandal with the disappearances of people subsided, the camp was reopened a few years later. The children arrived again, and in general, normal camp life began. It wasn't like that. One night, one boy did not sleep. His bed was next to the window, so he stared at it all the time. Suddenly, in the middle of the night, he saw in the distance a detachment led by 3 counselors. They walked somehow strangely. It seemed as if they were floating through the air. However, the boy was not worried about this question, but another, what are they doing here at night? But he decided to ask someone about it tomorrow. In the morning, he asked many people about the detachment and the counselors, but they only laughed at him. The next night, he couldn't sleep again and looked out the window again. Suddenly he saw that same detachment again. But now they were much closer than yesterday. Now one could see how their skin turned white and glowed in the moonlight. The boy woke up his friend, who was sleeping on the next bed, but he only said that this was all not true and that he should sleep at night and not stare out the window. Offended, the boy went to bed. In the morning, after much debate, he finally persuaded his comrade to watch the strange detachment with him, to which he agreed. The next night, they both did not sleep, waiting for a detachment to appear on the horizon. And he showed up. The children walked in a friendly formation a meter from the window. Their skin was pale, so pale that it even shone blue. They were thin, so thin that their bones protruded as if broken. And their eyes. They were not there. There were black holes in the empty eye sockets. The boy screamed. Children passing by sharply turned their heads towards him. With evil smiles on their faces, they laughed with ringing childish laughter. And their empty eye sockets drilled right through. With the same smiles, they entered the house through the same window, and each approached their bed. But other children were already sleeping on them. And then they killed the sleeping people and tore out their eyes. But that boy survived, hiding under the bed. When the counselors arrived in the morning, they found only a bloody mess of a pile of corpses. And when the boy told them about what he saw at night, at first they did not believe it, but they still decided to invite a priest. And he agreed to come. 4 people stayed overnight, 2 counselors, a priest, and that same boy. The next day, everyone was dead. They didn't have eyes. The camp was closed again for several years and recently reopened. By the way, They died here, in this very house. Yes, there they are, in the window. Story 2. Devil's Tree. I was born after the war. My father returned as an invalid, a severe concussion, which at the time of my 7th birthday drove my father to madness. During the next attack, he killed his mother, and when he came to his senses and saw what he had done, he went behind the house and hanged himself on a birch tree growing there. This birch tree was quite remarkable. No grass grew around it. It was half dry, but for some reason, no one undertook to cut it down. After the death of my parents, my grandmother took me in, with whom I lived until I was 16 years old. And then she studied to be an accountant, buried her grandmother, and returned to her home. I wasn't afraid to live in the house. I forgave my father a long time ago. I realized that it was shell shock that was to blame. True, a couple of times, returning from dancing on a moonlit night, it seemed to me that a noose was swinging on that birch tree. I asked a neighbor to cut down this tree. He refused for a long time, saying that they had already tried, but it ended badly. But then he finally agreed, and he and his son-in-law promised to destroy the birch tree. The next day, returning from work, I found out that the men had set out to cut down a birch tree, but they failed. The neighbor's son-in-law fell on a saw and seriously injured his hand. I realized that the tree would remain growing behind my house. In the meantime, I met a guy. Alexei just returned from military service, a handsome man, an accordion player, and a carpenter. What a man to look for. We started meeting with him. He kept talking about the wedding and our future life. I sinned with him, and I got pregnant. Though I didn't tell him yet, I was ashamed. And then one evening, a friend came to me and told me that Alexei had sent matchmakers to Svetlana, the daughter of the kindergarten manager, today. That they had been dating since winter, and it was August, and that he had received consent to take her as his wife. I was so offended that I flew to his house like a bird. But he himself is not at home, and his mother says to me, "Why does he need you? Your dad was crazy, and Alexei is no longer interested in you. Leave quickly, otherwise I'll tell everyone how you can spread your legs." I could barely move my legs and made it home. There is one question in my head. What should I do now? After all, shame will fall on my child too. They will call him fatherless. Suddenly I see a noose hanging on my birch tree, and in my head there's a voice in my head. "It's not scary. Just try it and you won't have any problems." How I ended up near the tree, where I got the rope, how I knitted the noose, I don't remember anything. I came to my senses already on a stool. There was one like this in my yard, and I was holding the noose in my hands. And putting a noose around your neck is oh so scary. And in your ears, there is a thin voice. Come on, it will be good for you." Then I felt that I was falling, and the thought flashed through me that it really wasn't painful or scary. And a loud voice said, "Idiot, what are you planning? Young woman, why are you planning this? I see a man sitting in front of me, shaking me," and I howl out loud. He picked me up, carried me into the house, and sat with me all night. In the morning, I finally came to my senses and asked him who he was and where he was from. It turned out that Dmitri, a technical school teacher, is now on vacation and came to our river to fish. He has a friend living in our village, and he walked from him to his tent at night, and he saw me with a noose in my hands. I told him about my trouble. Dmitri scolded me and said that it was a shame when children were abandoned, but when they gave birth, it was happiness. He suggested that I go to Moscow and find a job there. Accountants are needed everywhere. Dmitri helped me move to Moscow and get a job as an accountant at his own technical school. And before the birth, Dima proposed to me and my son was born with his patronymic and surname. Unfortunately, we didn't have any more children, but my son didn't know for a long time that Dima was not his blood father. We came to my native village every summer. I tried not to meet with Alexei. A few years later, they told me that a young guy had hanged himself on my birch tree. Such anger took over me. I grabbed kerosene and poured it on the damn tree and set it on fire. It burned for a long time, and I saw a loop in the flames. Then, many years later, I read that there are places that attract suicides and that the devils pull people into a noose. So I think that that birch tree was such a damn place.